Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Regional Recovery Hub survey release. I'm going to give it about 30 seconds or a minute for folks to jump on. I see them coming in. So welcome. I think we all have access to the chat. So if you would like to introduce yourself on the chat with your name and organization, and we will get started shortly. And as we wait for folks to jump on, I just wanted to remind you all the chat is open for introductions or comments. We do have Spanish interpretation available, and you can choose the language channel at the bottom of your screen. With that, I'll give it a couple more seconds before we get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. Again, welcome to our Regional Recovery Hub survey release. My name is Diana Colleen, and I am with the California Community Foundation. So a little background before we get started with the briefing that we have scheduled today. And take you back to the end of 2020 when we were really wrapping up our first year with the pandemic. The California Community Foundation Board made a commitment to the pandemic recovery of LA County. At the time, at the time we knew that the one-size-fits-all approach would not work with such a beautiful monster like LA County. And so we decided to do a breakdown of the county inspired by the 2020 We Count LA census campaign. Okay, sorry. Before diving into the strategy discussion on how to recover from the pandemic, we knew we had to face what was in front of us. We had to work with community partners to use the same play strategy to talk to our communities about COVID-19 and really give them all the information that people needed to know on how to stay safe, resources that were available to them, and eventually information and access to vaccines once those were available. Since the start of the pandemic, CCF has worked with lead organizations in some of the most disparately impacted regions in the county by COVID-19, but also by structural inequities that manufacture these more significant vulnerabilities. We believe that this is the ecosystem of local service and advocacy nonprofits in the most vulnerable Los Angeles County communities that will provide the support to address the structural inequities. Through our Regional Recovery Hub initiative, regional leads, and these are 6 organizations, will work to provide subgrants to cohort of nonprofits in each of the Regional Recovery Hub region, convene multi-sector tables in each of the Regional Recovery Hub regions, strengthen regional stakeholder networks to foster greater collective action and collaboration, and support the development of local action plans with short, mid, and long-term goals and strategies. These 6 regions that we are choosing to move, or we decided to move forward and prioritize, are the Antelope Valley, that has Antelope Valley Partners for Health as a regional lead, the San Fernando Valley with Pacoima Beautiful, the South LA region with Community Coalition, Long Beach having Centro Cha as their lead, Southeast LA region with Sala Collaborative, and the San Gabriel Valley with Active SGV. So to start the journey of regional recovery hubs, we had to understand what our communities were experiencing, feeling, and aspiring for. This is where community surveys come to be. So I will hand it over to Dr. Sunshine to share more about the 6 region community surveys.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thanks for everything you and your team have been doing on this project. My name's Rafe Sonnenschein. I'm the executive director of the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA. And we've been working with the California Community Foundation for a number of years now on communities, especially starting with Southeast LA, CELA as we call it. And CCF collaborated with us, especially with the leadership of Efrain Escobedo and with Diana Colleen, to do surveys in Southeast LA about people's daily lives. And then when the pandemic hit, we did larger surveys about the impact of the pandemic and where things would be going from there. The idea to spread and have the surveys go to 6 communities, including CELA, came to us from CCF, and we enthusiastically endorse that. This is a path-breaking program, so different from the usual survey work that you'll see. Which candidate is ahead, who's behind, what are the political issues of the time? This is about life issues. This is about community issues. And it's an opportunity to unearth the voices of communities, unearth the voices of communities. That is so rarely done. And you take a risk when you unearth the voices of communities, because you may hear things that surprise you, or things that even push your advocacy in somewhat different directions. But at the end of the day, to have the voices of the community put together with this kind of work allows action to take place. And that's the important thing that this is all about. It's about action and change. And the recovery hubs have been very excited about this, and we've been very excited to work with them. The particular survey data you're going to hear about today was developed and presented by the organization, a company called BSP, but really you're going to hear from one of the leading survey scholars and active people in the United States, who's Dr. Matt Barreto at UCLA. I'm here to tell you, in a world in which New York City stole the head of the Philharmonic to go to New York, so we have lost our conductor, where people come and go from places, LA was greatly fortunate to steal Matt Barreto from the University of Washington, where he had become one of the foremost scholars in the United States on the voting and participation of the Latino community and other communities as well. When he got to UCLA in 2015, he set up a wonderful institute, the Latino Public Policy Institute, which has been a very important force in policy and government here and nationally. He's been an advisor on survey work to the White House, to the Congress, and to numerous organizations. He's written books and articles that are at the forefront of the field of political science. So he's a big deal. That being said, Matt's also a regular person like the rest of us, and also in another way that is very unusual for people in the survey world. Matt believes that this idea of surveying communities is critically important for how the world is going to operate going forward. And Matt Barreto has joined with us on all the CELA surveys, and his company and his leadership has directed this survey as well. This is your first chance to hear about the overall survey work in the 6 recovery hubs that, again, CCF, as Diana points out, has really developed this as a model, very important model going forward. Data is power. People's voices are power. They're not just numbers. And that's what makes this so important. People who have never been asked before are being asked questions people haven't been asked before. What is your life like? What is your community like? And what are your community needs? What we're going to do today is Matt is going to present the data that he found, tell us a little bit about the survey, and then we're going to have a discussion with 3 leaders of Recovery Hub communities. And then we'll turn it over to your questions, although what the heck, we'll probably take some of your questions during the conversation that you put into the chat. So with no further ado, I want to present someone whose work I admire so much and who I've known for many years, even going back, I think, to when he was a graduate student. And that's Matt Barreto. Matt, welcome aboard, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you. It was too much of a generous introduction from Rafe, who has always been a great partner in this research with us. We've worked with Rafe and his team at PBI for a very long time. now in understanding communities here in our region. And so anytime they call, as well as the folks over at CCF, whether it was Efrain or now Diana, Luis and others, it's always a real pleasure to bring this team together, because we know it's going to be a serious endeavor. And I'll start with that as I pull my slides up to share with you all. Let me make sure I have the right screen for you. That it is going to be a very serious endeavor. And let me just jump in and show you what we did in these different regions. And that is that we interviewed 3,000 people, but not just randomly selected across all of Los Angeles. Rafe and the team at PBI, in collaboration with CCF, they said, we really want to hone in on these regions that we think are underserved and are not getting enough discussion, understanding. They have not had a chance to have their voices heard. And so we have robust and reliable samples of 500 in each of these 6 regions of the Antelope Valley, Long Beach, the San Fernando Valley, San Gabriel Valley, Sela, and then South LA. And so we're able to compare and contrast. And much of what I'm going to do for you today is to compare and contrast what we found in here. We did this in English or Spanish, according to the preference of the respondents. And it was a mixed mode survey, which is really the sort of cutting edge right now. We still had 25% of live telephone callers where person was calling another person, but we also used text messages, which are extremely common now, to still contact people on phones, but let them answer and click through the responses themselves on their smartphone, as well as using email invites or other online sources in order to source this project. The last thing I'll say is that we had a second component of this project that we're still unveiling, in which we did a crowdsourced community-based link in each of these 6 communities. And we had another over 800 additional respondents that the community partners helped us source. And that's helping us understand the demographics in those as well. Today, I'm presenting for you the 3,000 person large survey. So overall, I'll give you just a couple of overall themes, and then we'll just jump in to start looking at data. One of the things that we find is general consistency on issues across the region. Now, that shouldn't surprise people dramatically because these are all within Los Angeles County. We're not comparing communities in Houston or Cleveland, et cetera. And so there is some consistency, especially on area issues of trust and how they view their different local leaders. And then, of course, not surprisingly, things like public transportation. Also, you're going to see housing. You know, these are things that Angelenos across the spectrum are struggling with and want to see attention on. However, there also are disparities. And one of the ones that we bring attention to here is the COVID pandemic. And you heard Deanna say that this was one of the first issues that CCF started diving into. And we still see that disparity. We see that some communities feel that the recovery has already happened. We see other communities where as many as 20% think that they're still in, quote, a crisis right now. And so that's interesting and important to understand why some communities haven't recovered or haven't felt that they've recovered as quickly. So let's jump in and start looking at what these priorities were. We saw we did this at the tail end of 2022 and into the first month of 23. And so we were asking people, what are the most important issues that elected officials need to prioritize? And then we inserted where it says region, we inserted their specific region in there. And so you can see here the issues that sort of come to the top across the overall, and I'm going to break this out by region in a second: housing reform, education, workforce development, really still a lot of people talking about wages and job opportunities, neighborhood and community infrastructure, something that you don't see a lot right here in national polls, is that we need to make sure that there are streets and parks and resources in neighborhoods. And then something that sort of rounds out these top bucket of issues is this access to mental health and wellness services, and that those need to be culturally appropriate and they need to be available in community. I'm going to show you these breakouts for each of the 6 communities so you can see a little bit of how they compare and contrast. For example, here in the Antelope Valley, workforce development here at the bottom actually was the top issue at 40%. So perhaps it's a slightly stronger emphasis, on jobs and wages, and workforce development might be something that the people there were telling us about. When we look at Long Beach, the top issue, sort of tied with housing, and perhaps related to is neighborhood or community infrastructure. Again, they're not dramatic differences, but you do see an emphasis difference in some of the different regions. In the San Fernando Valley, housing reform, and again, neighborhood community infrastructure came out slightly higher. In the San Gabriel Valley, you see workforce development was about 10 points lower than it had been in the Antelope Valley. But these issues of community infrastructure, I want to continue that theme of being really resonant throughout the data. And here in Cella, we saw education as the top issue. So again, still wanting to see that emphasis on K through 12 educational opportunities, and they want to see more effort there. And in South LA, housing reform far and away sort of outpaced by double digits some of these other items that we saw in other regions. So similarities in that, these issues on your screen are top issues across Los Angeles. But you see some different prioritization in each of the regions, and that's why it's important to have that regional sample. We asked people how involved they were and whether or not people came and talked to them about the election and got them registered. You see these boxes over here that we've circled in red is the percent that say no, that no one contacted them. And so the community that had the lowest rate of engagement or contact was the San Gabriel Valley, where 54% said that candidates and in campaigns had not engaged them. The community that had the highest rate of contact was Long Beach at 53%, only 40%. So you do see some differences, 12-point differences there, where we see that there was a bit more political engagement. We know we had the former mayor of Long Beach running for Congress and doing a lot of engagement. We know that we had a former county sheriff from Long Beach, as police from Long Beach running for county sheriff. And so there might have been a bit more engagement here in this region, but you can see overall it's somewhere around the 50-50 mark, which again suggests that the glass is half empty. And when we're talking about political engagement, we always like to see these numbers higher, more political engagement, more contacting in these communities. What did people do? What type of participation were they able to do during the sort of later stages of the pandemic? You can see some of the top issues here at the top of your screen, talking to people about involvement in politics. Overwhelmingly, the respondents said that they were engaged, that they were talking to friends and family. And of course, this was a very political season that we just came through. About half of our respondents said that they were posting messages in social media about politics, which is a high mark, to see. And we see some differences there again by region where, South LA and Cella had even higher rates of that sort of online engagement than some other regions, but, generally high. Signed a letter or a petition. We know that this is easier nowadays where there's a lot of online sort of letter and petition campaigns, and about half of our respondents say that they saw that. And you see other things sort of dropping off to getting down to lower participation levels. Only about a third said that they attended a meeting, lower in some regions, San Fernando Valley and San Gabriel Valley, slightly lower, and being able to attend a school board meeting. So we're hopeful that as we come out of the pandemic, that some of these more in-person activities might start to raise, but we do see this is an actively engaged set of regions here, still taking part through personal discussions, but also involved in social media. When they think about what sort of services they want, we have a split here, and this should not be surprising to anyone, given that we are still facing inflation and cost of living that people are telling us is a critical issue. Overall, a majority of respondents say that they favor a government that provides more services, more social services, even if it means they have to pay higher taxes. And you can see that that's the case across every region here. Every region hits the 50% mark, but there is variation. In South LA, it has the highest rate of support for that at 60%, and San Fernando Valley, the lowest rate at only 51%. So there is a divide. People are still cost sensitive right now, but on average, we do still see a forward-looking set of communities that want to see government doing something. This is not a region, unlike other parts of the United States, where people are saying, look, no taxes, no government services, cut everything. That's not the message we're getting from our respondents, but it's also not perhaps the way it was 10 years ago when the economy was even stronger and perhaps there was even slightly more support for this. So let's look in and see how people are doing now that we are, officially in some sort of post pandemic phase. Although, of course, we know many people are still struggling with this, and rates of COVID transmission and hospitalization still are affecting our communities. We first are started by asking people about their financial situation. How is it compared to before the pandemic? And you can see that we are starting to see some nice differentiation on this, although net, we're still 5 points negative. 32% in the LA County as a whole are worse, 27% better. This is marked improvement from where we were a year ago or 2 years ago. And 41% say about the same. And you can see this varies across the different regions, where some communities, such as the Antelope Valley, are only 3 points behind. Some places like Long Beach actually say they're +9 better, that things are doing a little bit better there. Whereas others, San Fernando or San Gabriel Valley, are double digits, 14 or 17 points. Sella even stronger, under by almost 17 points. And then South LA feels a little bit more positive. And so you see, this is a very interesting result here, where we have seen some areas. Now, the plurality are saying things are the same. It's not as though it's very positive necessarily in Long Beach or South LA, but there is more positivity there from the perspective of our respondents that they're starting to see. I'm going to contrast that later with some specific responses about transmission of COVID itself. Do you expect your outcome is getting better or worse in the future? Very positive, outward looking, future looking communities that we have here. And this is overall, we see the same trend across all 6 regions. This is where there was a lot of similarity. 33% think it's going to get a lot better, and 54% somewhat. Only 14% think, looking forward to 5 years, are things going to get worse? So we have a lot of hope and forward looking, which is long characterized, especially communities of color in Los Angeles. How long do things take to recover? Do they expect projecting their situation into the future? You see that the plurality, the most common answer here in the middle, is about 1 to 2 years, which is why people expect that 5 years from now we'll get even better. These numbers here at the top are the less than a year. So you've got about, a little bit over 30%, mid 30s, who think it's going to take less than a year, including many who are in that 6-month category. So people are starting to see a recovery. That's what this slide is telling us. The number of people who say over 5 years here at the bottom, single digits. Okay. And the number of people in 3 to 5 years. So that's only about 20% who are, we need to definitely understand those 20%, but who are in this category. So there's a lot of hope in here, even as there's a lot of financial burden. We asked people how much money they currently had saved for emergencies. We know that COVID, while being, the worst health pandemic our nation has seen in 100 years, had actually bigger financial impacts, especially in communities of color and working class communities. We asked people how much they had saved. We know a lot of people had to burn through savings to make ends meet during COVID. And the plurality answer in almost every region here was less than $100. If you take in these, top 2, you're talking about a very substantial portion. 38% in the San Fernando Valley, 36% in San Gabriel, 45% in Sella, 32% in Sella, who have less than $500. So there's substantial percentages of people who, if they have to go to that emergency bank, it's 500 or less. And there are some people here in the middle, but these are by any stretch not substantial margins. To get up to over 5,000, again, these bottom 2 rows, you're talking about maybe a quarter of the population or less. Housing insecurity continues to be something that we need to keep an eye on. And while the blue bars indicate people who said they have a steady place to live at 3/4, that's not necessarily something for us to, be ecstatic about. We should be more concerned in thinking about those folks in the gray who say they have a place to live, but they're worried and we should be hyper focused on those ones in orange, which come in at only about the 3 to 5% range, but 3 to 5% of a county of 10 million is still a lot. I do not have a steady place to live. And so we see that varies. South LA is slightly higher at 79% have, but that leaves 21% without. And you see Acela at the lowest at 69% have, which means 31% are either worried or don't have. And so this is something that certainly creates a lot of anxiety for folks. We ask people about extreme weather. Certainly we just lived through some of the most torrential downpours from about Christmas until the middle of January, as well as normally facing wildfires in our region. And we see a little bit under half who say that they're being impacted by this in Los Angeles. And you see about a sixth of the population or so across the regions say that they're being significantly impacted. That's highest in South LA, where just under a quarter of respondents saying they're being significantly impacted. Lowest in Acela and San Gabriel Valley at only about 12%. That's still 1 out of 8 households. And you see a lot of people here in this middle category of being somewhat impacted. So this is also something that people are aware of. And again, you see some variation across community. Here we ask how safe do they feel? And again, this is a little bit of a glass half empty, glass half full. You see the 3/4 mark there. That's good that people do feel safe and comfortable living in their communities. We maybe don't have the same coverage and sense of uncontrolled crime that we see in cities like Chicago and other places, at least from media accounts. But we do have that percent, somewhere between 20 and 30% of our respondents across these regions who tell us that they feel anxious, nervous, worried about safety in their community, and that's something that we need to think about and how we can address. We ask questions about police funding. Generally speaking, our respondents want to see police force and funding increased. It's the plurality answer. It's lowest in the San Gabriel Valley, but we don't have big deviations here across region. If you take the number of people who say it should be decreased, this is a small minority across the regions. It doesn't get higher than 16%. So people are looking to and still have some amount of trust in these institutions. They want to see them working effectively. They want to see them working responsibly. But there is support for maintaining a well-maintained and a working police force. Transportation is certainly an issue that Angelenos across the board are struggling with. We ask people how easy or difficult is it for you to get to work, and you see these bars in orange. It shouldn't surprise anyone. We have these bars in orange are the people who are saying it's difficult, makes my life difficult, and it's somewhere around the 30%. So about 3 out of 10. One of the things that the Zoom culture has done to us as we meet with each other over this platform is that it's created a little bit of perhaps a buffer of anywhere between 10 and 20% of our respondents who say they're no longer as affected by transportation issues because they go 100% online. And so that's something that perhaps could be seen as a way to continue to ease traffic and transportation issues here in Los Angeles. All right, now let's focus in and talk about what's happening with COVID. 54% of Angelenos agree with the statement that the worst is over. We just have to adjust to this new normal as we restart. And we see that only 13% in the region as a whole, in the county as a whole, think that we're, quote, still in crisis. However, we show you two contrasting regions here, that in San Gabriel Valley, it's lower than the average at only 10% who think we're still in crisis. But in South LA, it's double that at 20% who think we're still in crisis. And so it does vary by region and what people are experiencing. Generally, even in these two regions, you see, there's a healthy number of people who think that we're recovering and we're going to recover. But the number who think we've fully recovered across the entire sample, including if we go back, is really only about a quarter who think we're on the way or there. And you can see that it does vary by region. Where have people been turning? What have they been asking for during the COVID pandemic? I'd like to draw your attention here to the bottom line, going to a food bank. We asked, did you ever use these in the past year? And they could have said yes to all of these. These are striking numbers for all of us to be concerned about, that over half in every region, and as high as 70% in some regions, but in the 60s in 4 out of 6. People say that they have had to rely on a food bank. And we know that there's not as much coverage of this as it was during the start of COVID, but this suggests that there's ongoing lack of resources and inequality in these communities where people are going, and there needs to be more done to address these very, very basic needs. Not surprisingly, on the next slide you see here, people have indicated that they or someone they know is struggling to buy groceries or household expenses. They've lost their work hours, they've seen their work cut, or they've struggled to make rent and mortgage payments. A clear majority, if not 2/3 of our sample across region are struggling with just some of these basic necessities. Again, either them or someone they know. We know sometimes people don't like to admit to this, so we often ask, is it you, someone in your house, or someone you know? And this suggests that this is widespread. If 60+% of people either say themselves or someone they know are dealing with these issues, these are issues that are being felt in the community. Specifically, we asked them, did they fall behind on their monthly payments, on any of their monthly payments? And that could have been a car payment, a utility bill. So it was any payment. It wasn't just your rent. And you can see there in orange, the people who said yes, it happened 2 or more. The ones in pink here in the middle are saying yes, it happened once. So you're into the 40s to 50% of our community who said that this happened to them at some point during the start of COVID. So this is going back to March of 20, that they've experienced this sort of financial insecurity. Last, I'm going to conclude by just talking about, continuing to get the need to push out the vaccine and make sure that that's happening, that boosters are happening. We see, a strong majority are vaccinated and boosted. Additional 15 to 20% say they got vaccinated, but maybe they haven't gotten all the boosters. And we have a minority, but we know that, this still can cause problems between 9 and 19% who are not boosted, are not vaccinated, and have never been. When we ask people what was the best reason for them to get the vaccine, overwhelmingly 75 to 80% said to protect myself and others. It's a story of making sure you're healthy and that your community is healthy. You also see people saying to help open up businesses and the economy rebound. We know a lot of people who might have been hesitant said, look, if I have to get vaccinated to get fully back to work and integrated, I'm going to do that. When we ask people why you haven't been vaccinated, and again, this is a smaller sample, but because of our large sample size, we can look at this. We still see a trust factor there. Still remains the most common answer just among the unvaccinated is that they don't trust it. They don't believe in it. They have heard things about it. So who can help us deal with that? Doctors and healthcare professionals. These are the single most trusted folks on this. The more we can work with community health clinics and folks in the community, those are our trusted messengers. And even nationally, the CDC came in as a second common. And we see others, media, elected officials, employers. These are people who rate far lower down on the list. We asked them who was the most trusted here. And so the more we can work with those folks, we expect we can work on those unvaccinated populations. All right, thank you. That's the end. I know it was a lot of data. I'm sorry if I went fast at different times. I'm going to turn it back over to Rafe and Diana to continue the presentation.
Great. Let's see. I'm trying to get, okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for that very informative presentation. Matt, why don't you stand by, because we'll probably call you in to answer a few more questions. And so Matt will come back on if we need him. We're going to go right away to our panel, and to get as much discussion as we can going, I probably will be a little brief on introductions. They're terrific people, three leaders in the recovery hubs. And would David, Veronica, and Wilma start your cameras up? We have David Diaz, the Executive Director of Active SGV, San Gabriel Valley. We have Veronica Padilla Campos, Executive Director at Pacoima Beautiful, and Wilma Franco, the Executive Director of the Sulla Collaborative. Welcome to all three of you. And please keep your microphones on, because we're going to go back and forth quite a bit, and that way we won't run into anything slow. I have a bunch of questions for each of you, and we're going to try to use our time effectively. But David, could you tell us a little bit about Active SGV and your role there, and what does the organization do?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. David Diaz, Executive Director of Active San Gabriel Valley. We're an environmental justice and public health nonprofit located out of the city of El Monte, focused exclusively on Eastern Sanchez County. Our mission is to create a more sustainable, equitable, and livable San Gabriel Valley. And so since the pandemic, we've done a couple different things kind of directly related to some of the survey findings. One is the 2020 census, engaging with folks on that, COVID-19 vaccination, education and encouragement, from hosting pop-ups to doing door-to-door engagement, phone calls, text banking, literature drops, community presentations, help thousands of people get vaccinated and or boosted, food distributions at local parks in partnership with school districts, with food banks, utility bill assistance for folks, and referring folks to other service providers. And so we have a broad scope of activities that we do. I think for us at the beginning of the pandemic, we realized that our skills and strengths as a community-based organization needed to pivot and shift to be able to provide more direct services to the same community members that we were working alongside to achieve our mission. And so we intentionally made that shift to be able to help and be as much of a resource as we could during the pandemic.
So David, one of the findings that's really striking is the one about food banks. And I think one of the great virtues of this survey work is to be able to be surprised by things. Something tells me you're not surprised by that. Tell me about your experience with food banks and how it relates to the fact that over 60% of people in these communities were utilizing food banks during this time.
Absolutely. I think one of my biggest opportunities for improvement is really the need and investment in the social infrastructure, nonprofits, food banks that don't get the same amount of investment as maybe government will, but yet they are a trusted messenger. They do have relationships that they built with community members, and so I'm not surprised at all to see that. I think over the course of this, they do receive different types of funding, but I still think the funding isn't enough, because you do have older adults and folks that are low income that solely rely on either a school or a food bank of being their main source of getting nutrition. And so I think to the extent possible, we do need to provide more infrastructure and funding and general operating support for food banks to be able to help people.
Thanks, David. By the way, let me remind everybody that the Q&A function is set up, and there's different folks here who can answer different questions. And so just put your questions in the Q&A. And also a reminder that there's going to be follow-up sessions in each recovery hub where the data specific to that community in comparison to the overall survey will be presented. So we're going to dig even further into it. Veronica, let me introduce you. Veronica Padilla Campos, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here with everybody.
It's great to have you. The Executive Director of Pacoima Beautiful. Can you remind everybody where Pacoima is? LA County always confuses everybody about who's where. So tell me where Pacoima is.
Yeah, sometimes folks ask me if we're even in the city of Los Angeles, and we do have a Pacoima City Hall. So folks think that we're our own city, but really we are a community in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, Council District 7. But Pacoima Beautiful, we did start in Pacoima, but we actually service all of Northeast San Fernando Valley. And we are also in environmental justice and health. You can almost rubber stamp exactly what David said to what Pacoima Beautiful does. I think a lot of us had to kind of switch, right, to become more service oriented during COVID, and have really made sure that we pivoted when we needed to, starting with census, just like David described, and really snowballed from there and finding creative ways to ensure that we're reaching even folks that we traditionally don't reach, right? Because so many folks needed that extra help during the COVID times.
So Veronica, how much is that changing now? I know the pandemic's not over, but I heard this morning they're talking about it leveling out. Are you seeing a change in the service demands that you already took on during the pandemic?
Just a little bit, but things like the utility assistance is really ramping up a whole lot more than maybe we were seeing in the beginning. The beginning, it was more about food. We were really concentrating on providing fresh fruits and vegetables because the county and other services were giving their sort of like dairies or canned food or whatnot. And we were concerned with the fresh fruits and vegetables. So we partnered with a local farm that was putting bags together. We can distribute those. And now we're seeing more requests for assistance with utility bills. And you know, that I think has not dwindled down at all, if not.
That's likely to continue for a while.
Yeah.
So one of the things for us all to think about is how much is going to continue the new normal, or you might call it the new abnormal, after the pandemic is over. That's something we're all going to have to really dig into.
Right. I definitely agree with that, and really being on top of the survey was really helpful, right? So we have a sense of, is there a need to pivot, or what do we need to be paying attention to, like was mentioned, for us to be prepared for as we recover.
That's great. Thank you, Veronica. Wilma Franco, the Executive Director of the SELA Collaborative. PBI, for full disclosure, is a voting member of the board of the SELA Collaborative. Wilma, tell everybody what SELA is technically, without mentioning every single city, but people don't always know what Southeast. They think it's the southeast part of the city of Los Angeles. It's obviously not.
Yes, it's not. It's the southeast part of LA County. So really looking at that 105, 10, 710 and Alameda corridors area. But the SELA Collaborative, we're actually a network of organizations, right? And we began really looking at civic engagement, nonprofit capacity, and building the data and research infrastructure here in the Southeast. So our mission is really to strengthen the SELA communities, build collective power, and encourage innovation to drive systemic change. So for us, is similar to our colleagues, David and Veronica, right? Like we're actually not a service provider. We work with a lot of our partners that are, right? And it's a range of service providers all the way to, PBI, who's one of our members as well, right? But I think similarly, we found ourselves in that position during COVID where we really needed to step in to address some of these needs that we were seeing in the community. From leading the census efforts to leading the vaccination efforts across the region. And I think being able to have that network across the region really facilitated the process. But, food, I think that was one of the things that hit, home for me the most when Matt was presenting, was this issue of food insecurity in our regions, because it is something that we saw drastically and continues to be a big need.
So I'm going to ask each of you what was the most surprising, maybe even shocking piece of data in there. So far we've heard about food banks. Anything else? Veronica, was there anything that jumped out at you that might affect even your own thinking, even though you're in the middle of this work on a daily basis?
I don't know if shocking is the word, but was a little bit surprised to see the transportation be folks really saying that it wasn't very easy for them to commute. I think that was surprising for me. But we do understand that a lot of our residents do have to commute elsewhere. And, that does add a burden in various aspects, right? So to me, that really solidifies the need to continue working on good and affordable transportation options for our residents.
So Veronica, that could potentially mean a follow-up at some point to go back to people and say, where are you commuting, right? Kind of what's your network of going from place to place? How do you get there?
How you get there is really important too, and what can make anything easier for you.
Great. David, what surprised you, or what piqued your thinking the most in looking at some of these numbers?
Well, a couple of them. I think the transportation piece for sure. I'm interested in dissecting that a bit more and looking at the how people get around in transportation, because I know in the San Gabriel Valley, public transit is scarce and not reliable. I mean, LA County really, the car centricity that we've just built. And so I'm really curious to dive into that and see, what modes of transportation people are using with respect to their responses. I also will say, haven't the severity of how their lives have been impacted by extreme heat or extreme weather events. I think that was also surprising. I think for us, we know based off of research that people are going to experience more days above 95 degrees, jumping from 32 all the way to 74 by 2050. And so that's going to, I think for us, get incrementally worse. And we know that the most vulnerable often experience the brunt of that first. And so that was a bit surprising. And then the other one, I guess not really surprising, but just I didn't know it was that low, was the elected officials not being trusted with information. I knew that was like a source, but I think they put 2 in there, like the number was 2% in there. So I maybe may have gauged it a little bit higher than that. And so that was really interesting to see how low that was.
That actually startled me as well. Wilma, when I heard about the weather one, Matt, I've never heard that question asked before. I mean, that like really hit a nerve. Something's there. Wilma, does it have anything to do with the troubles in infrastructure that kept coming up in there in communities of need where people don't feel confident in the infrastructure for withstanding severe weather?
Yes, I think it has something to do with that. But I think when I looked at when Matt was presenting, I was looking at the numbers. I think I was more concerned of those folks that said we're not being impacted by it, just because we know that, especially right in Sela, there's, the environmental justice and the challenges that we're experiencing are so drastic, right? That it just also kind of made me pause and think, are the community that answer the survey, like, do they, are we really fully understanding the questions, right? Or are we really understanding the impact of these issues, right, on their lives, right? Because I think we understand it as leaders, right? Because we live in those spaces and we navigate some of these conversations. But when I think about, like, it just made me think, like, how would my mom have answered that question, right? Like, I don't know that she would have known how to answer that. So it just made me want to, like, kind of have more conversations around why community felt that way. I think transportation was also a piece that I was like, oh, how are you moving then if that's not a challenge?
I have a couple of questions from the audience that I want to quickly. David, one question was and this is a quick one, which city in the San Gabriel Valley do you think is in the greatest need of better services and more services?
Which city? I wouldn't, maybe a region, the Central and West Puente Valley.
Say that again, the Central
San Gabriel Valley and the West Puente Valley.
Okay. Now here's another type of question from Monica Bankin, which is, people are talking about the need for food distribution, help with utilities, inflation, and yet are willing to pay higher taxes for more services. Veronica, what do you make of that? What's your experience with how people think about taxes, services, their needs, and willingness to pay more in taxes, even when their resources are perhaps lower?
I saw that, but you know what? The San Fernando Valley had the lowest desire to pay more taxes. And I was like, that makes sense, because we often feel like the stepchild to the city of LA, where like we feel like we almost are literally the dumping ground sometimes, because we have the landfills and all these different sort of services that we bear the brunt. So I think that's why you saw a little less from the San Fernando Valley, because I feel like we give, but yet still don't see much improvement there. But I was surprised to see other areas that were willing to. And I think that demonstrates, when we all voted for Measure W and different sort of measures where we really want to see improvements and are hoping that our taxes kind of go towards that. But that was kind of interesting. But I did notice San Fernando Valley was like, not so much for me. So
I would
probably
agree,
go ahead. Well,
Rafe, I just wanted to add, I think I completely agree with Veronica. I think there is that sense of like, if this means that other community members that may be suffering can get some assistance and some support, like we're willing to go in that route, right? Because I think part of it is a lot of our community understands the challenges that we're all experiencing, right? I think even as I look at some of these pieces and the intersectionality of it, right? Like there's real concern about housing, But we also know that our communities are very housing burdened, right? Like more than 40% of their income is going to housing. So when you look, and look at that concept with the concept of the amount of folks that need food and access to other basic needs, it makes sense, right? You don't have enough resources to actually secure. And what comes first, especially as families, right? It's like, I have to have a roof over my children's, head and make sure they have somewhere to sleep. So how do you look at all of these issues from an intersectional lens, right? Of like one impacts the other, and we can't talk about one without the other. I actually was interested to hear what Matt's assessment to that question was. I don't know if he's still on.
He'll jump on.
I'm here. It won't let me open my video though.
We'll just take your audio.
So I strongly agree with Wilma's assessment of that, which is that, people have an understanding that even as they are struggling themselves with costs, that they still expect their government to provide basic services. And so we've long found that, especially in working class communities who are struggling with costs, whether it's housing, food, transportation, healthcare, that they're willing, oftentimes more willing, to pay a little bit more in taxes than the super wealthy who maybe just want to sort of, keep their money to themselves. That these communities have that understanding of knowing that, look, if we all chip in a little bit more, our community is going to benefit. And we see that throughout here. As I said, I would expect, in that 5 years down the road of recovery, that you'll see even a higher support for that. The only reason I think it was stuck around the 50-50, I think overall was 55 yes, 45 no, was because there is a little bit of economic insecurity as well. But there's a strong desire from these regions and from the respondents, I think, as David said, to see more investment in just basic necessities.
Mhm.
And a lot of that money needs to be funding that goes to community-based organizations who are usually on the front line of those service deliveries. So I think, it's consistent with what the panelists have said, Rafe, and something I've seen over the years here in Los Angeles.
Great. So we have a question from Efrain Escobedo about state and county budget processes. And here's kind of the punch of this whole thing. If you could take this survey and put it in front of state elected officials, county elected officials, and others, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to know that they don't seem to know right now about areas that maybe they haven't paid enough attention? David, what do you want them to know?
We have a couple minutes, huh? I would say, first of all, like the administrative burden, let's streamline some of the contracting to make that a little bit more equitable so that we can spend more time on direct service versus administration and reporting and all these other requirements you have. I think in alignment with that, make space for like non-traditional groups, community groups to be able to deliver services that they're already doing. So mutual aid groups and other smaller organizations to be able to deliver. And then also just the one big part is that you need to invest in general operating support for food banks, nonprofits, other direct service providers. So you need to increase your indirect rate to allow people to hire people with that skill set and expertise, because we as nonprofit leaders and executive directors and maybe people that work here have expertise in the subject matter, but often that other stuff, the accounting, the management stuff doesn't. So we need to have the capacity to be able to hire and maintain and sustain and pay those people competitively to keep them on staff so that we can do the work that our communities need. So that's one.
Well, that hit a nerve. I'm glad we asked that question. I mean, that's something everybody's concerned about. What about you, Veronica? What do you want them to do? Or what do you want them to know and hear from all this?
I think the survey really demonstrated that this is, really active community members. It was random, and yet we did see folks that are, the number of folks that have signed a petition was really high for me. I thought impressive. So our community are paying attention. Our community want to see change, and our community wants to make sure that they understand what is truly needed. And so listen, open up more doors for engagement, I think is really important. Don't be surprised that they want to be engaged. Have various opportunities for engagement on these various topics. So,
I mean,
yeah,
I would consider, Veronica, this meeting today as a rehearsal for when you were in front of county supervisors and state legislators and you have the voices of the community as the wind in your back. And I want to throw in something as we near the end, because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to ask you each about something Matt and I have talked about a lot. How is it that people can understand that communities are struggling and assume that people are hopeless, disempowered, and unable to really advocate if given the opportunity to advocate? And the mixture of hope that appears in the surveys and what you just said, Veronica, about how many people are talking to family and friends, how many are signing petitions. People are kind of ready to be heard, but they're not. It's not a sense of hopelessness. It's more like how to find that rung in the ladder that will get the resources to allow people to go where they want to go. Wilma, have you seen this mixture of struggle and hope in Southeast LA over the years you've been working there?
Yes, we have. I think even as far back as some of our community charlas back in like 2018, when I first joined the collaborative, there's a sense of, what David mentioned earlier around, there's a distrust, right, of government officials. But there is a very unique desire to build those relationships and to be heard, right? And I think a lot of the challenges that we often see come from how we define like community engagement and how we define things like civic engagement, right? A lot of our communities, especially in Sela, because we do have such a large population of, immigrant community, right? They may not get out and vote, but they will sign petitions and they will come out and they will, be active in the community. So I think part of it is how do we create those spaces to really meet community where they are versus just assume that they're just not doing the work.
David, what do you think of this sort of juxtaposition of hope and struggle all at the same time in the same communities?
Yeah, well, you're looking at the San Gabriel Valley, you saw its top 3 priorities be the neighborhood, community infrastructure, housing reform, and education, right? And I think when I think about neighborhood and community infrastructure, we're talking about new and safer roads, access to reliable public transportation, being able to walk and bike in your community, have lighting and feel safe about walking out of there, your schools and educational facilities, having a medical service provider or providers available in your areas, open space, being able to take your kid to AYSO or Little League at a local park, that type of community-friendly programming, like that kind of speaks to the spirit of hope that we have. And I'm hoping the listening that will happen on behalf of government and elected officials to invest in these neighborhood community infrastructures that people really want to see. Because I live in the city of El Monte currently, and if I, as much as I would like to go to some of these things in my community, they're not available, and so I have to seek them elsewhere. And so similar to my neighbors, I think they also would like to see this community infrastructure and investment be in their community. I don't want to have to drive or walk or take the bus for an hour to get elsewhere. I want these things to be available for me and my neighbors. Veronica,
hope and struggle.
I was really encouraged to see the hope that we saw in the survey. It makes me feel very I guess encouraged and actually seeing the light with them, and really continuing to work together with our community. But I also wonder if we have the age range of those that took the survey, because I would be interested if we're kind of seeing the hope both in our youth and in our adults. But yeah, I actually am very encouraged by what we heard today. And I know that the struggle is still there, but I really think that as community, we really lean on each other, and that's where that hope is coming from, knowing that, we are very resourceful and will identify where to go for these sort of needs, but we can't do it alone, really, I think is what is important to recognize. We have to continue working together.
What a wonderful way to end this conversation. We're at the end, and I want to thank you all and remind you that we're going to continue this work in the individual recovery regions with meetings with recovery hubs on their own data. But it's so good that you all got to see each other's hubs and what's happening, because at the end of the day, people have so many things in common. I want to thank CCF for generating this project in the first place, and for their staff, and for PBI staff, and for Matt and your team, which has been with us for so long now. And I really feel like this notion of unearthing the voices of the community is one of the most powerful survey tools I've seen in many years. I want to thank Wilma and Veronica and David for jumping in and giving us your thoughtful comments, and especially all of you who listened in or watched. It's great to have you with us, and let's just go onward and upward. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Great of happy Valentine's Day to everybody.
Oh,
Peace and
hey.
love.
Well said. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.